Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Fanfiction Tapes. I'm your host today, Maya, pronouns she, her, and today I am joined by
Elizabeth. I am the guest. Pronouns she, her.
And I am our producer, Ian. Pronouns he, him.
Today's topic is all about canon, fanon, and the original content Terminator line, which I am obligated to inform you all is yet another Mayaism. So, for those of you who may not be familiar with the first two terms, and for all of the listeners, what do they mean? Canon, in this context, is just referring to what is actually within the original work itself. What information is directly or sometimes implicitly stated about the universe and the characters of that world. Canon is, if an event is canon, it is something that happens within that work or the work states has happened. Fanon is a portmanteau of fan and canon, and is usually something that is not canon or not explicitly canon, but is commonly taken by the fandom to be canon.
Or a portion of the fandom.
Or a portion of the fandom. Not all of these are universal. It does not need to be universal to be a fanon. Just, it's usually commonly accepted. Again, that's not a hard and fast rule. People can have their own individual fanons. And the original content Terminator line, which I was inspired to call it that after reading a What If article by Randall Monroe. A lot of times with AUs, which we've talked about previously on the podcast, you can start to wonder when it might just be more worth it to take the concept and just make your own thing rather than having to distort things to fit within the existing material. Because there is kind of a line of where it might be better to just file off some of the serial numbers and write Twilight. I had to make the joke, sorry.
Well, Twilight is True Blood fanfiction, and are you thinking 50 Shades?
It's 50 Shades, I thought.
Yeah, 50 Shades is Twilight fanfiction.
And then Twilight
is like
True Blood fanfiction.
Oh, I had it backwards. I thought it was Twilight was 50 Shades fanfiction.
Oh, Jesus, no. God, no.
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 It's the other way around.
It's very, very much the other way around. Anyway, I mean, we got what you meant. But, I mean, Twilight did rip off True Blood in many respects, so whatever.
I would like to mention something that I just noticed isn't really in the script, which is that oftentimes there are levels to both canon and fanon.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, hard canon is the way that you mentioned in the definition section here, which, it's in the text either directly or implicitly, but then there's also like word of God, so-called, where, it's not written in, but the author has stated that it's either in their world-building document or whatever. And then you get, like, what TV Tropes calls it Word of St. Peter, which is where it's not the author themselves, but somebody else who is involved in the production of it.
Like, if it's like the actor who portrays that character, for instance, or like
Sure.
a close collaborator with the author or something of that sort.
Yeah, I have a question. Would Tolkien's son saying something be Word of God, or would that be Word of St. Peter?
Word of St. Peter.
Yeah, more along those lines.
Because, like, he was the editor of the Silmarillion and, like, sort of collated the manuscripts after J.R.R.'s death.
I think there is some dispute as to exactly how much material he wrote himself, which may have some funny implications for when the material enters public domain in the future, but that's a little off topic.
That is interesting.
Yeah, the levels of canon were definitely like, 'cause I kind of mentioned, like, there's the harder stuff, the stuff that's explicit. And then some people will even go, well, no, if it's not, if it's only implicit, then that doesn't make it as canon.
It's like if it's not in the text, then it's not considered canon. For example, like
yeah, there's a lot of levels to it. And my approach with it is kind of something that I got from I don't know how many folks are familiar with the Panda Red, a YouTuber and TikToker who does comic-based shorts. I don't even really read comics.
no.
Same. I don't read Batman, but his Batman skits are hilarious.
Yeah. As he said, his approach to it is basically everyone's canon is different, and it's shaped by his experience with comics being such a long-running media form with theoretically the same characters. Means
Yeah. Oh my god.
and a bunch of different writers means there's going to be different interpretations of the characters that are all canon, technically.
That is an interesting sort of thing that you brought up, because that makes me think of the various Ghost in the Shell adaptations and like how much of those how much is canon to each. It's like how what is like my canon versus like I don't know the strict canon of say Ghost in the Shell standalone complex or the Oshimamoru movies or whatever. And
Exactly.
It's like, and that brings me sort of to like I think it's useful to and we haven't I don't think it's in the script, but did we I think it's useful to mention the concept of headcanon, and I think a headcanon essentially is the smaller version of fanon. Like fanon is essentially a headcanon that a lot of different fans have. I would say it's a very pithy, simple way of putting it, but that's basically what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The term's not in the script, but I would say that definitely is one of the levels of fanon. But yeah, that idea about adaptation is also a good thing to mention with regards to canon, because when you have a story that's adapted from one medium to another, oftentimes there are changes made to the story to try and better fit the new medium.
Or just for the heck of it, just because like the author wants to make a certain change, wants to add a certain spin on it.
And usually there's when you have a change of medium, there's a change of authorship as well. When you take a book and make a movie out of it,
usually the author of the book and the screenwriter aren't the same person.
And usually when it comes to cinema,
right,
I think most people consider the director to be the author of that.
Under sort of more like traditional auteur theory. I guess.
Yeah.
Although with film, it's like it's all a collaborative process, and there's to some degree, and so there's ambiguity there. But yeah.
Oh yeah, film and television, including animation, is a lot more collaborative.
There are a lot of cooks in the kitchen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes
I think
too many cooks.
Related to that, something that's important for this episode to mention is that I kind of was starting to say this, and then I got a little distracted, and the conversation tilted elsewhere. ADHD talking hour, folks. Is that there's going to be different canons. There's going to be things that are mutually exclusive, and that's okay, right? Things don't necessarily need to be perfect, and someone else's canon, it's okay if their canon disagrees with yours.
That reminds me of something interesting. Like this goes back all the way to like how the word canon was like sort of first used in like biblical stuff. Like from what I understand, like there are points where the four gospels don't line up exactly. Like there are contradictory things in like Mark, Luke, Matthew, especially John, because John diverges and was written much later. But all of them are part of the Bible and therefore canon. And it's like, how do you square that like theologically? And that's just as well as just sort of like on sort of a even like a narrative standpoint, not just sort of like what that means for like Christian theology. It's also like, how can we like, it's essentially, how do you have like varying interpretations of what you consider to be the same essence the same basic stuff. Even like how can you consider that the same basic stuff, even if like the the manifestations thereof are different, and some people, I mean, I guess we're getting to go back to sort of modern like fandom and fanon and canon interpretations. Like some people don't, like some people will consider like such and such like a different one adaptation to be like of a different essence than another.
I think the idea of canon as applying to works of media other than, the Christian Bible is a very modern fandom thing.
Yeah, that's true. Cuz like I guess
Yeah.
for like the longest time you have like stories that are transmitted either orally or through like copying manuscripts out, and the variants are, I mean, I guess you have like a lot like Shakespeare basing his plays on like Italian models, for instance. And I feel like there's not really one canon. It's just like different ways of telling either the same story or different stories with the same characters. It's like there wasn't as much focus on, to my knowledge at least, there's not as much focus on like, must you reconcile these things? How do you determine the truth?
Yeah, that is interesting. It's not something I can speak much to because uh I haven't seen really much of fandom prior to the 2020s.
R.I.P. Well, I mean, I
Uh,
can speak to it like at least from 2011 onward.
So then how important is canon?
It depends.
yeah,
It really depends.
it really depends. I mean, ultimately, I think the best answer I can give to that is however much you want it to matter. Because there are stories where I think that contemplating canon and sticking with it can be important, depending on what you're trying to do. Sometimes, meh, the canon isn't really
Yeah.
important to the story you're trying to tell. For me, a lot of times, what I am most invested in is not necessarily the canon events and the plot or the setting, but the characters. I like putting the
Same,
blorbos in
honestly.
situations. And, like, I think most of my first fics that I wrote were all just things of, like, okay, I want to take these characters and I'm putting them in a new box. Have fun. I actually don't know if I've ever written anything that is theoretically canon compliant or is canon compliant.
I haven't written all that many fics, but I would say a good chunk of the ones I've written have at least attempted to be canon compliant, and those that aren't canon compliant, sort of, they're sort of for want of a nail type things, where it's, I try to have canon compliancy in all but one or two aspects. Like I wrote a Ghost in the Shell standalone complex fan fiction where essentially it's like, what would change if the major Kusanagi Motoko was trans? Like how would that sort of how would that impact the events of the story? And I don't think it like, the thing I came up with was that it didn't really impact the events of the broader events of the story. It was more in the particulars of of um of like the characters, like sort of interactions and the psychology behind all of it. It was more of a manifestation of my headcanon that Motoko could very conceivably be trans, based on like, I guess most of it's just vibes, to be honest, as well as the sort of general transhumanist themes of Ghost in the Shell. But I guess that ties into sort of like fanon as like an extrusion. I don't know if I'm using that word correctly, but sort of as a as arising from canon versus fanon that is sort of maybe not necessarily in direct opposition to canon, but fanon that doesn't really care about canon. And I tend to have fanon that tries to care about canon usually.
I have some stuff that kind of tends to care about canon, but again, the canon isn't what interests me. I just went and counted. I have a single fic that I've written that is canon compliant, and that one I created as a gift to a friend. Because for me, I don't think canon's necessarily that important, and some of that's shaped, I think, by the fandoms I'm in, where there's a lot of parts where the canon is just kind of ass. Or at the very least, I think it is. I mean, actually, we could talk about this because the Percy Jackson show just ended.
So I was just saying, like, I know the pain of having canon that is ass, and
Yeah.
therefore it's like there's less respect for it in that instance.
Yeah, I think Rick Riordan had the feelings of his own canon was ass when he was getting involved with the show, because the show makes a lot of pretty significant changes from the book.
Maybe not ass, but just like I was inexperienced, and this is how I would revise it.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm fine with a lot of the changes. Some of them I think are really good. I don't want to necessarily get into them, because I think some of them are best if you aren't expecting them. But that's definitely one. For me, the big thing that was like, bro, your ass, and I've mentioned this before on the show, I love Riordan's work. I am a big fan, but he done fucked up about the ADHD meds. And to his credit, in the show, his representation of ADHD is far superior to what he did in the books.
Yeah, I guess we live and learn.
Yeah, there's absolutely some live and learn, and hey, that's...
Live and learn and then get meds.
I think that is sort of a unique case because it's an author taking on their own work as opposed to like a different set of people engaging with the author's work.
Yes.
So it's not fanon per se, but it's more like it's a revision. It's a sort of a, this is like older and wiser sort of, looking back on one's own thing and redoing it.
I'm trying to find a fandom where I can just be like, yeah, there's elements of this show that's ass, because usually most of what comes to mind for me is that is shows rather than books that I've read.
Same for me.
And I'm
too,
also
although
not
there's
gonna
one
piss
big one.
people off.
For me, it's the Harry Potter fandom. I spent way too much time in that fandom. I eventually, like, I kind of joined it just for the fanfics when I was like 14-ish. But then I gradually was like, okay, JKR. I mean, this is even before the transphobia and anti-Semitism reared their ugly heads. But like, we were just like, oh, this is not well written. We can change this. We can do whatever we want with it. And like the people who wrote canon compliant fanfic of Harry Potter, we were like, a lot of us kind of regarded them, like, we respected them, but like we kind of regarded them as like, oh, you're a bit too stuffy. You're not quite. You're not taking enough liberties.
You viewed them as like almost aristocratic.
Well, not perhaps
Stuffy.
like because like these people. I guess stuffy is not necessarily the right word, but like they're like, it ended up being like a little bit boring because like there were so many clear flaws that needed to be corrected in the text. So it's like the fanon elements were often seen as sort of a correction of the inherent defects of the text, and people would write like alternate universes upon alternate universes of like of essentially what became their own characters in the end. And there were a lot of instances. There were so many instances where like the characters were distorted to an unrecognizable degree. But all in service of the author's like vision,
Yeah, I think if I had been more online as a child, I probably would have also been...
To be fair, you're also younger than me, so...
I am younger, and I also read the Harry Potter books at a much younger age. I was in first grade when I read those books.
Oh, same.
Oh, yeah, so, like, if I had been more online or in that age, I probably would have delved straight into that, but, I wasn't really, the age of being online for me, well, that was a lot more occupied with Destiny, and also Marvel was big at the time.
Mm.
Although I never really gotten into the Marvel fandom. I don't know why. I may have said this before. I don't know if I've said this on the show or not, but I don't know why I was never into comics. Why I've never gotten into them. Well, I know the reason as to why I'm not now. Things cost money, and I read too fast for that. But the train of thought has left the station, and I am not on it.
F.
What were we talking about?
I think we were kind of in the transition from how important is canon to is fanon even that bad.
Fanon.
I mean,
Everyone immediately sucks in their breath. You know you've hit a funny topic.
See, the thing is, like, it depends on the media. It depends on the media. I think we sort of we touched on this. Like, if the canon is seen to have inherent flaws, then it makes it much easier to, I guess, disrespect the canon and make it your own, because you think, oh, I can do a better job than these writers. I can make a better world. I can write better characters than these. So you're like, why don't I just freaking do it myself?
That is in fact a thought I have somewhat frequently.
But then again, like, I think some people realize, I mean, this is a bit of a digression, but I think some people don't quite realize just how hard it is to actually do that. And they end up thinking, well, they think that they can do a better job than the original writers, but then they're like, oh no, I mean, then that the result just becomes incomprehensible and worse than the original. But that's a digression.
Yeah, and sometimes you end up writing Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality, and then
What?
Oh, that.
Oh
that
boy.
Train wreck.
Okay. Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality is a Harry Potter fanfic that basically started a cult.
What?
Okay, there's this old forum called Less Wrong that is all about rationalism.
You may want to define what that is.
As in the idea that the world would be a lot better if people would just reject emotion and only care about facts and logic.
I think the Less Wrong forum was started
Ben
by the guy
Shapiro.
who like actually like did the thing, because his username on
Yes.
fanfiction.net was Less Wrong.
It
So,
is
like,
the same guy.
yeah. Or I mean, like, he started the forum, I think, in concurrence with the fic.
Yes. So Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality is a rewrite of Harry Potter if Harry Potter was a rationalist.
And by rationalist, we mean a complete self-obsessed dickwad who talks like he's 25 going on 55 and is completely condescending to every single character because he was raised by a scientist. Like, what if Petunia Dursley married a scientist and raised Harry Potter in like this way and that way? And then it's like, no, you can't. You can have like magic disobeys conservation of mass or whatever. It goes completely so far up its own end that it sort of becomes a self-parody. I haven't read it, but this is all just what I've heard.
I've only read experts, but I've heard it talked about at least a couple times. It actually came up recently on this past week's Behind the Bastards episodes.
Oh, really?
Yes.
How so?
Oh, no.
Because, okay, so Robert Evans was talking about how Silicon Valley has spawned a cult around AI.
Oh, that.
And the roots of that are in the Less Wrong forums.
Oh, God.
Which were basically created around the Harry Potter fanfic, or concurrently with this Harry Potter fanfic.
Calling it a Harry Potter fanfic is generous. Because it's essentially an extended soapbox. It's an extended
We are talking
soapbox.
about what is the line between canon and fanon here, right?
That's true.
This is a case where maybe he should have filed off the serial numbers and just made his own thing, but
I think he just decided to piggyback off the popularity of the Harry Potter fandom at the time.
Yeah.
Like, I guess now if he made it, it would, or mid 2010s if he had written it then, it would be like, it would be probably off the MCU or some shit, because that shit was popping off.
Maya, you might be familiar with the idea of Rocco's Basilisk.
I'm familiar with it, yeah.
That came out of Less Wrong.
The only reason I know about Rocco's Basilisk is because of Rational Wiki.
I know about it from Kyle Hill. Anywho, so I now know that I can blame everyone misunderstanding machine learning on this bastard.
Oh God, you're right.
You can kind of also.
F me, you're right. That's depressing.
I think depressing. Less Wrong is also how Elon Musk and Grimes met.
Oh God.
Ugh. Okay, so for the listeners who don't know, machine learning is the actual proper name for, like, 99% of what most people these days call AI. There is no intelligence. It is just really advanced mathematics that is doing probability junk.
Yeah. I mean, people used to call it machine learning, but then they were like, "Oh, we're gonna call it AI to drum up cash, to get investors, to get public hype." And it's just like, but anyway, this is kind of a digression anyway.
Yeah. Honestly, I only even really care about it because I'm in fluid mechanics now, and it's useful for that. And
but anyway,
this is why we can't have good
methods
things.
of rationality. It is completely. It becomes like you have all the characters in it. Like you have Harry Potter, you have Ron Weasley, you have Hermione Granger, you have I think Harry or the. Really, it's wrong to call him Harry Potter because he's not Harry Potter. He's essentially a sock puppet.
He's Mr. Less Wrong.
Yeah, he's Eliezer Yudkowsky, speaking through the fictional construct of Harry Potter to sort of put all these irrational, like, emotionalists in their place to prove to them, like, why rationalism is morally superior, guys. And oh God, there's a passage where it's like, I don't know. The only passage I remember really is like, it's not even connected to the rationalist bullshit. It's like, there's essentially the Harry in the fanfic is like, essentially threatens to rape Luna Lovegood or something. And I can't remember why, but it was just tossed off so casually, and it's frankly disgusting. And
what the f***?
Yeah, I think I'm either that or it was like Jenny or something. There was like shut up or I'm gonna like, essay you. I guess I already said rape, so.
It
was in like a later chapter, I think, but it was completely emblematic of the kind of person who was writing the fic.
Wow.
I don't know why I find that shocking. And yet...
The internet, ladies and gentlemen.
God damn it. But yeah.
My Immortal doesn't sound quite so bad in comparison anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, no, My Immortal's quite, and let's talk a little bit about My Immortal, because like, actually, that is an interesting example of fanon, at least in the Harry Potter family, because you have like the sort of sympathetic portrayal of like Draco Malfoy, which began in like the early 2000s with Cassandra Clare and the Draco in leather pants thing, which I think it's still called the trope is called Draco in leather pants on TV Tropes, and it's because it's like, how can we sort of like, we see this character, we the fans see this character as like unfairly depicted in the story, even though like they're depicted in the story as they're supposed to be, because this is the author and the author's worlds is by the authors. But I guess like some people felt that it was like inconsistent with like, I don't know, some people's version of like, there's various reasons. I'm not even gonna try to speculate on why they made.
Actually, this relates to one of our pre-recording conversations that led to you describing your taste as better than mine.
Not better, but...
Thank you to the Harry Potter fanfic writers who invented Draco and leather pants, because that led to Ianthe Tridentarius.
Yay. Do people do that to Ianthe?
No, that's
She's
the author.
explicitly written as a female Draco in leather pants.
But then it wouldn't be a Draco in leather pants, because that's sort of like a metatextual thing. And whereas this is in the text. So it's like... an author can't really do a fan interpretation of their own work, can they? Well, except for the Rick Riordan self-revision stuff. It's like... But, like, I don't get it. I don't get it.
Ianthe's interpretation of the world is very different from most of the rest of the people at Canaan House.
And just to clarify for the listeners, we're talking about the Locked Tomb. I mean, I guess
Yes.
if you listen to enough
Yes.
episodes of this podcast, you probably know that already, but whatever.
Oops. Yeah, Ian and I are very normal enough about the Locked Tomb that it comes up often enough.
And unfortunately, I cannot be part of your little club.
And unfortunately for you, Dylan's not here today. We try to restrain ourselves more when Dylan's here because he's also not part of the club.
You have more respect for him than for me?
You're not here almost every week.
That's true, but I'm still a human being.
I mean, it has taken us more than half an hour of recording time to actually bring it up.
That's true.
So.
That is quite a long time.
Restraint!
Yes! Magical. No, I'm just ribbing you guys.
Yeah,
Sure.
we get it. It's,
Okay.
Hopefully you can hear
It's
me
fun.
smiling.
Yeah. But anyway, you were talking about Ianthe Tridentarius.
Well, mostly just because you mentioned the Draco Malfoy in leather pants, which
Yeah.
the authors mentioned as an inspiration for
I guess that
Ianthe.
that's interesting. I guess it's like, because, like, I don't know. You have the Draco and leather pants stuff, which is explicitly, well, it's meant to sort of, it's be like a fan redemption of an otherwise bad or antagonistic character. And then you have the converse, which is Ron the Death Eater, I think also taking from Cassie Clare's work in the Harry Potter fandom in the early 2000s. I'm not quite sure. But essentially
Wait, hold
it's
up.
like...
Cassandra Clare is in,
Yes, that Cassandra Clare. The same one.
I have several of those books on my bookshelf behind me. Granted,
The Mortal
they're hidden
Instruments?
behind. Yeah.
Oh
I
my
can see
god,
that-
you don't know the story? Oh, you have... Honey, you got a big storm coming.
Oh no!
Oh, I'm gonna send you
Not
the links.
again.
I'm gonna send you the links to the Cassie Clare shit. Like, that is the same. Like, she writes her last name a bit differently, obviously, with an I or without an I instead of with an I. But like, that is the same Cassandra Clare. She wrote Harry Potter fanfic in the early 2000s, and then she became a professional author in the 2010s. And yep, there's so much there. There's so much there. You don't
I
even
had heard-
know. It is.
I had
deep.
heard like hints of rumors of her having been involved in fandom stuff and some drama.
She was
but
a
I-
big
I-
name fan back in the day.
Wow,
She had almost a cult of personality like around her. She had like a cadre of like people who would like fellow fans who like essentially kind of worshipped her.
I mean that's not uncommon these days in fandoms. That's Coeur Aleran, couple of folks in Arcane. There's been a lot of instances of cults of personality.
Do you want to talk about Coeur de Laurent?
Yeah, that one.
Coeur de Laurent, I guess. Not quite sure how to say the
Mr.
name.
British. Yeah, so for those of you who aren't familiar with the Ruby fandom, there is a pretty well-known and very prolific fanfiction author, Coeur Aleran, who writes fanfiction that's primarily set in the first 3 volumes of the show. And I do feel like I have to start this off by saying, I don't really like him. I'm not a fan of his work.
Is this to set up like, but you gotta respect the hustle?
No, I don't even respect the hustle. I do respect his technical ability. The writing that he puts out at an impressive rate is generally free of mechanical errors, and that is not necessarily super easy. If all you care about is it doesn't have mechanical errors, then...
But why don't you tell the listeners, our dear listeners, what it is exactly about Coeur d'Aran's fanfic, alleged fanfic, that that makes him a topic of conversation for this podcast?
Yeah, he is... Well, I will also say he is pretty controversial. I don't know many folks that think kind of mid of him. Most folks either love him or hate him. I think he's a bit of a bitch.
And why?
All, mildly lighthearted swearing aside, he writes stories that are, to me, I feel kind of samey. He writes, Jean, gets the girl.
Essentially, Chad Jean. Base Chad Jean.
It's not even really a Jean that has ever been present in the show. He pretty clearly ignores the text of the show and the way Jean is written to get the Jean of... He gives Jean, basically, a new job and a new girl to chase for each plot that he tells.
Aren't a lot of his fics harem fics as well? So, like, it's not just one girl, it's, like, multiple?
I don't know about that. It's been a long, long time since I read any more. It's been...
I'm pretty sure
I
Kurt
don't know
has,
that
like, some
he-
harem stuff.
I think he does have some harem stuff, but I think he also has a mixture of harem and specific genre shipping.
Monogamous Jean shipping.
Yeah.
I guess. But essentially, what you're saying is that, like, Coeur d'Aran's sort of mode of operation is to essentially Flanderize, exaggerate the characteristics of Jean so much that he becomes totally and utterly divorced from the canon character of Jean Arc and essentially becomes a vehicle for the author's own characters. And here I think we get into the OC Terminator line.
Yeah, this is a good setup, because I think, honestly, that Coeur All-Around's material would be improved if he were just writing original content. I don't think it would be as successful, because a good chunk of the draw is, yes, these are characters from hit show Ruby. Yummy.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's the same thing with Methods of Rationality. He could have written an original story, but he decided to piggyback off the success of the Harry Potter fandom. And so Coeur d'Aran's basically using the Ruby name to make his brand.
And, I mean, I can't throw that much shade, because, I mean, that's part of what I do as an author, is I don't really want to write and tell my own stories, because it's a lot of effort to set up that kind of investment, and ain't nobody got time for that. I have a day job, and it's not writing, and it's actually also not the podcast.
If only we lived in a society where one could write more often.
I probably wouldn't actually write all that much, because I would fill my time doing inane shit. But
Yeah, and like there's only so
same.
productive one person can necessarily be. Like I have a sort of a friend who is trying to make it as sort of a freelance professional writer, and it's not. I'm just like, writing as a full-time job does not sound great either. I mean, she can do it, it seems, but it's like some people like have stories to tell, but not necessarily like they don't have like a whole lot of stories to tell, and their pace is rather slow. And that's me, because I work very, very slowly.
it's understandable. A couple of the other folks we've had on the podcast, and at least one person we are trying to get on the podcast, are in the same boat of trying to get published, or in the process of it.
They're like freelance authors.
Yeah, Riley has put a couple books out. We've talked about those before.
Impressive.
We'll put one book out, and I believe they're all self-published from Riley. Cam is attempting to get a book published at some point. I don't know the exact status right now, but I know that's something that she's been trying, and I hope she succeeds at.
But in any case, what were we talking about?
We were talking about the original content Terminus line. Not Terminus,
Yeah.
Terminator. For some reason, when I originally coined the phrase, I was thinking of Terminus, but it is actually Terminator, is the name of the line, which is the day-night line. I don't know why I got Terminus.
It's essentially the same sort of concept, so whatever. It's the line at which it would probably be more artistically sound, perhaps, more advantageous to sort of scrape the identifying the fanish characteristics off of a work and present it as original work, because the proportion of original content has become high enough that it doesn't necessarily need the either the baggage or the trappings of an established like other media thing to hang on.
Carry it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes, I mean, it gets the case where you're writing something and there's a couple of stories that I want to tell that I cannot tell as fan fiction. And they're actually why I got started writing fan fiction, because they're stories that I want to tell, but the last couple times I've tried to tell them, I haven't really been able to get very far. Granted, for some of these stories, the last time I tried to write them was a decade ago. So it's been a minute. But I got into it to want to improve my stamina and capacity to write, because I wasn't happy with how I was able to tell the stories. I thought they deserved better. I won't have a way I can fit the stories into the characters or the worlds of what I write fanfic about. There's no way to fit it. Like, if I were to try and do that, it would make the story worse. It would genuinely have significant deleterious effect on what I'm trying to do.
I think there's something in there about potentially like the two sort of ends of a spectrum when it comes to like writing fan fiction, and it's like, one, the thing that you posted, or the thing that you sort of postulated, which was the fact that you have stories to tell, and you're like, and you mentioned sort of fitting them in to an existing sort of mold or framework of an existing fandom. And I think that's one end of the spectrum. And then I think the other end is engaging with a work is sort of the opposite of that, the sort of converse of that. And you engage with the work, and then the story you want to tell arises out of the initial narrative, the initial characters, the characters, so that they can't really necessarily be separated from the original property. And I think there are degrees along that spectrum, of course, but
yeah, that's part of why, for one of them, actually, why I can't fit them into fanfictions, because the characters
they exist
there are
already.
Yeah, they exist already. They're pretty important, and they really reveal a lot about me now that I didn't consciously understand as, a 12-year-old.
Right, that makes sense.
And I'm like, wow, I really was a lesbian.
That's fair. I think with me, like, I don't really write a whole lot of fanfic. Like, the vast majority of my fanfic tends to be, like, sort of... It's because of a love of certain, like a love of a certain story or universe or characters. And so I try to, and the impulse to write fan fiction arises from that, rather than, from any desire to, I want a story about this and this and this. What fandom can I do it for? It's not necessarily that. And I think one can have both like a story idea that one wants to fit into a fandom, but then also like have ideas that are born out of the love of that thing, that fandom. And I think it can also sort of, the two can also be kind of combined, because well, to go back to the Harry Potter fandom, which is not something I like to say very often. To go back to the Harry Potter fandom, I am going to show my whole ass on this podcast, something that I am loath to do, but for a little while, towards the end of my engagement in the fandom, I want to say like 2019, 2020, I wrote and read a lot of Bellatrix and Hermione, that ship. But the thing is, like, my love for that ship back then was not predicated on necessarily like strict fandom adherence. Like, far from it. That ship does not exist without fan sort of differentiation from the canon, because the two characters in the canon, there is no way in heaven or earth that they would get together. But in
can I roast you for a sec?
Yeah.
Yeah, you would be a Bellatrix shipper.
I guess that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. But the thing is, like, what I did when I wrote a couple little vignettes, maybe just one. No, I wrote a couple little ficlets, like involving that ship. The thing is, I wasn't doing it out of a love of the canon. I was doing it out of a love for other fan works. It's sort of, in a sense, it was piggybacking off of others' sort of differentiation from the canon. And I think fanon was a big part of that, because while recognizing that there were like incredible differences from the canon, I think what I liked about it was just, like, the fact that it was still like something that, I don't know if I'm making any sense here, but like I was piggybacking off of fanon, but I was using that as the sort of, as if I would a canon, if that makes sense. Like both my little ficlets were sort of responses to other people's Hermione fics that I liked, and I felt that, like, oh, this could easily fit in like the universe of like this fanfic, which I really liked, and so like this fanfic by another person that I really liked.
Yeah, I mean, I've also done fanfic of fanfic. I completely get that.
I think it's
and I'm also going to show a little bit of my own ass here, in return for roasting you. In that, what I just posted there, there's a brainworm that I've had since, again, I was probably about 12, 14 at the time when I read that series.
Oh, it's been freaking ages since I thought about that series. I think I read like the first 2 books or something.
Yeah, and that's based off of like the 7th book or something. It's not the 7th book. It's late in the series. I think it's the 6th book, actually.
Yeah, then I definitely wouldn't have.
The Septimus Heap series, for everyone listening who can't see our chat log.
Yeah, and that was I would call that a
these characters.
fairly similar overall vibe to Bellatrix.
Oh, valid. Like 2 characters who in canon would not in any way be a couple, but
technically in canon they kissed.
Oh, interesting. Well, that
Shenanigans
sure
were
is more
afoot.
than my former ship had going for it. Literally carving her name into her arm. Or not her name, sorry, that's another thing. Anyway.
It's something that would never have happened. I just, that wasn't the story the author was telling. One of those characters is a fairly minor character who that's basically the last time she's a major character. I think she shows up in one other book, and that's it. which always disappointed me. I was always kind of at odds with the way that Angie Sage took that. I mean, it makes sense. I understand what she was going for, but remember, I was an edgy little lesbian at the age 13. I liked the spooky things. And we wonder why I liked The Locked Tomb.
I don't wonder at all now.
So, there's kind of one last thing in the script that I want to touch on. We've kind of mentioned it a little bit, is where do we like to draw the line with canon and fanon? Like, in terms of maybe what we go looking for when we go reading, what we write, if we do write, that kind of thing.
How do you mean?
That's an excellent question, because I wrote that like an hour plus ago, and for reference, we're about an hour into the recording, and I have no idea what I meant either. I think it's like, in terms of what we prefer, do we want something that's more canon compliant? Do we want something that's more influenced by fanon? You know, that kind of thing. Talking about what we enjoy, and that kind of differentiation.
Mm-hmm. I think, yeah. I guess, actually, Ian, do you want to go first?
Oh boy.
I have stuff I want to talk about, but you can go first.
Well, let's prod Ian for content.
Let's milk him till he's dry. I'm sorry.
I shan't say.
I would have to explain to my parents why I laughed to that. So, Ian, prodding you for content on where you like to draw the line between canon and fanon in fan content.
I wouldn't necessarily say that I have a hard and fast line on this. It's really whether or not I like the changes or not. I'm not all that interested in reading 12 more billion stories about Chad John.
That's totally fair.
On the other hand,
You want to read more about Chad Ianthe?
maybe.
Sorry, you were saying, I kind of interrupted there.
And yeah, the train of thought has left the station.
That's fair. I mean, I
You
can
said the
pick it up
word
if you
one.
want. No, actually, go ahead.
Right. I'm not necessarily interested in a lot of stories about Chad John, but I can read like one well done. Or I suppose I'm a lot more accepting of stories that deviate characterization if I'm very invested in like the setting.
What sort of examples might...
I would say that if a series presents a world that I would be interested in running a D&D campaign in, I can accept variation in characterization a lot more easily.
Right, because you're
Just
more
because-
invested in the setting.
Exactly.
Does that make sense?
It's a lot easier to just mentally, accept that, okay, this isn't this character from the show. This is some other character who just coincidentally has the same name.
Right.
Yeah. For me, there's there's also quite a bit of depending on what the changes are. There's some, like Miraculous Ladybug, where I am generally going to be more interested in divergences from canon in the characterization, how the characters are written, because there's parts where I think the writers did something less interesting with the characters. They did it. So, I've mentioned this before, I've complained about it before, I'm probably going to whine about it again. There's a character, Miraculous Ladybug, where the authors are trying to tell a message with the story, and they kind of started giving her something of what could have been the start of a redemption arc. And they realized that doesn't comply with the messaging they want to tell. And so they change it. They stop it there. And I was invested in potentially seeing that character learn to not be a jackass. And learn to be a better human being. And so I'm more interested in fanfics where that happens. Because that's what's interesting to me. The writers are off doing their own cool thing. It's the Top Gear meme, where that's all very cool and there's, a good car, but I like this and it's a garbage car. That's me.
So I guess what you would say is it depends on what you perceive as shortcomings or deficiencies in the text.
Yeah, it depends on that. It depends on what I think is interesting.
Right, that too, yeah.
To speak about Ruby again, and Cam, if you are listening, stop. I am not going to be responsible for spoilering you. This is spoilers for Volume 9.
Yes.
I would have preferred if Jean stayed old. I think that would have been more interesting.
You and a few other people.
Yeah, I'm not the only person that thinks that. I would have liked to see him,
Sex up Willow.
have gotten old. That would have been really funny. And I may or may not be looking for crack fix of that later because I think Weiss's reaction would be hilarious.
Girl doesn't have enough daddy issues. Let's give her some more.
Exactly. But that's what I think would be interesting. The Ruby writers didn't go with it. Probably because they kind of still want Jean to be a main character, and maybe they have intentions of shipping him with someone else in the main cast. I don't know.
Who can say at this point?
I'm not in the Ruby writing. Yeah, I am not a member of Ruby. I'm not certain whether I should say fortunately or unfortunately.
Let's just leave it at you're not a member of Ruby.
Yeah, I think I'll say fortunately because as a grad student, I'm pretty certain I'd get paid more. Yeah, sorry, Rooster Teeth, you earned that one.
I think I'll pick it up here, maybe. Unless you have other stuff to say.
Nothing terribly important, mostly rambling. There's a lot of fan and stuff I don't like. I can't think of any specific names right now, but I guarantee you it's out there.
That's fair. I guess for me, like, I would say I have similar sort of I imagine this is probably the case for a lot of fans, like where they draw the lines with certain media and with certain changes, certain fanon and other aspects. It's one, deficiencies or shortcomings in the text that you want to see rectified, and two, stuff that you would just feel would be more interesting, or perhaps just as interesting, but that hasn't happened in the text. Like, for instance, I mean, I am within the Ruby fandom. I am an ardent devotee of the fanon theory that Ruby's parentage is not actually what the canon has shown heretofore, and is instead her mother's still Summer, but her dad is instead Raven Bronwyn. I know that doesn't make sense, but I mean, consider this as a universe in which, like,
it's got magic.
Yeah,
if you're gonna be a bitch
IPS
about
cells,
two women having a child,
yeah, like, who cares? The reason that I like that option is that it's potentially more interesting than the canon option, and also I just ship Rosebird massively. It's just a very interesting and compelling ship to me, Rosebird being Raven and Summer. And I also think that Ruby, the Rosebird parents theory, as I and a few other people have taken to calling it, is it allows for some really interesting stuff to be done with, like, future reveals, and also sort of thematically, in conjunction with, like, Ruby's arc in the story and her relationship to, like, those who came before her. And, like, again, this is not to denigrate Taiyang. I love Taiyang, but, like, Raven's just a bit more interesting. But that's just with regards to, like, what I feel like. I don't dislike what we have been presented in the canon with, like Taeyang being Ryu's dad, but it's just like it's the sort of second thing where, and then the first count, the perceived deficiencies or shortcomings in the canon. I guess if I were to take another example, like the Orphan Black fandom, there was a character who there were several. I would say there were several fumbles on the part of the writers. So a lot of the fan fiction activity that I and many of the authors I read back in the day, a lot of our fanfic activity was sort of patching those holes or coming up with more interesting ways of fulfilling a story arc. Like, for example, the whole, I don't know, there was this conflict between, like, essentially the lesbian juggernaut, I guess the sapphic juggernaut ship of the story being broken up in season 3, Cosima and Delphine, and then Cosima is like, yeah, I'm gonna go date, and then she has a thing with this woman named Shay, and there was a whole thing with like Cosima / Shay shippers and Cosima / Delphine Coffine shippers in the fandom, and it got ugly. And then for those of us who liked both ships but wanted to sort of resolve the conflict and sort of also kind of, I guess, resolve what we saw as like the deficiencies of the show, with regard to there were also issues in like especially season 5, but also season 2 about like how Cosima and Delphine's relationship with handles. We decided to write fanfics about like what if Cosima, Delphine, and Shay like were in a polyamorous relationship and like how that would work, and like whether that would hopefully that would solve the sort of the seemingly intractable problems that had been presented in canon. And I guess that's just one example that I could come up with. There's so many other examples, but just to round it out, I have recently, not really all that recently, but like kind of recently, sort of my most recent 2 largish fanfic projects have been, what if this character was trans? And that's not necessarily like an indictment of the story itself. Like I love, for example, Ghost in the Shell and Tournai Gundam, but like I think like what if the main characters were trans is a really interesting direction to sort of take my fanfiction in, and it's sort of it's both reasons, because like, but it's also like I can't really hold it against like Shiro Masamune or Kamiyama Kenji or Tomi no Yoshiyuki that they decided to like, you know, not make these characters trans, because it's like these were like 20 years ago in Japan, and so like they wouldn't have, and so like I can accept that, but it's a case of like I think it might make the story better for me and my sort of indulgent tastes personally, because I'm trans and I want to have more trans rep stories, but also like trans rep that is very specifically what I like sort of grok and am drawn to, which is not always the case with all trans rep in stories. Like often it's just not quite something that I gravitate towards. And so this fanon is essentially the dividing line. The way I'm able to embrace these alterations from canon is that it's something that is not necessarily better, but perhaps more fun and fulfilling for me as the author and as the potential reader, because it's like I seek out this stuff, but like nobody's written it yet. That's the thing. I write the stuff because nobody's written it yet.
Yeah, I mean the one I posted, there are 2 fics total that come up for that relationship, and it's background and about like 30 words for the other fic. So much of fanfiction writing, I feel, is it doesn't exist. Is anyone else gonna make it? No? Fine, I'll do it myself. do we have really anything else we want to mention here?
Was there anything else on the script?
No, this was the last thing written in the script.
We are also well over an hour of recording time.
Good.
So,
Do we have anything in the mailbag?
Nothing in the mailbag today. So, if any of you listening want to chime in about your own opinions on canon and fanon, our email address is fanfictapes@gmail.com. You can also leave us a comment on our YouTube channel. We also appreciate if you leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to this show. You can also reach out to us on social media. We do have a Twitter. Maya runs that account.
yes. At Fanfiction Tapes is the at, capital F, capital T, no dashes or spaces in the at. I post shit posts and sometimes about when episodes are going to release. If I remember, sometimes if there is news about episode releases, if they're delayed, for whatever reason, I'll post that there. And sometimes there'll be a little bit about something behind the scenes, like actually what happened today during this recording. So, Elizabeth, do you have any social media or other works you would like to promote here?
Well, I would like to promote my YouTube channel, which has my fan songs on it. And other original music as well. It's at agogobell28 at YouTube. And the link will be in the description, I assume.
Yes.
But I also would like to promote my AO3 profile. And I mean, now that I'm actually writing stuff after being incredibly unproductive for years and years, my AO3 profile is also agogobell28, and I will drop the link in the chat for y'all. And there's a Ghost in the Shell standalone complex fanfic on it. There's actually a Heisei Godzilla ficlet that I wrote back in December, just on the spur of the moment because I thought of something. And then there's also my older stuff for Orphan Black, for Harry Potter, for other stuff.
I really need to watch Ghost in the Shell.
Watch
Yes.
the movie the 95 movie first. And then if you like it, watch Standalone Complex.
All right, I'll put that on the list.
Wonderful.
I usually watch stuff with Steamed, and we've been reaching near the end of Miraculous Ladybug, so we were going to need to subject ourselves to something soon, and
the movie is
it
a
needed to be
tight, like,
something
83
good.
minutes, and it's incredible. I can attest to the fact that it is incredible. It's 83 minutes, it's amazing. And then if you like it, you can subject yourself to the 52 episodes and a movie of Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex, if you so desire, which is also incredibly good.
Yeah.
If I recall correctly, the movie and Standalone Complex are different continuities.
No,
correct?
the movie Solid State Society, which is which was going to be the third season of Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex. You have first season, which is 26 episodes, second gig, which is 26 episodes. Oh,
I meant the 95 movie.
right, the
93 movie.
Oshiverse. You have, with that, the only follow up to that is Innocence, which came out in 2004 and is a trip. I don't recommend it unless you're really into Ghost in the Shell.
I haven't seen that.
Trips sound like fun.
It's good, but it's also weird.
I like weird.
Yeah.
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 I don't think either Ian or I could enjoy the Locked Tomb if we didn't. Anywho, that is enough Locked Tomb posting for an episode that is not about the Locked Tomb.
Don't you already have like 1 or 2 episodes on the Locked Tomb?
Officially, we only have one episode on the Locked Tomb so far.
Unofficially, every other episode has been about the Locked Tomb.
Unofficially, many episodes have been about the Locked Tomb.
Well, anyway,
I am and have been Maya, and today I was joined by
Elizabeth, I was the guest.
And I am Ian. Until next time, bye.